Yes, I'm sorry, you can't leave technology to me at all.
Well, it looks like it's just you and me now.
Yes, I'm sorry. I've just put out an appeal to somebody who's tech savvy because I've struggled all week with technology. I'm not going to get any better. I've just got to find somebody to help me. Um, it's it's a simple fact of life.
Yeah. Well,
But
I'm tempted to offer to take the reins again on a Friday, but I couldn't guarantee doing it every Friday. That's the
yes, I
problem.
know. Well, perhaps the answer would be for you to do it on the Fridays you can't. Then to let me know. Well, let's see. Anyway, we can't call it right here and now. Here we are. Here's Melissa. There she is.
No, that's not Melissa. That's Connor.
Oh, that's Connor. Well done, Connor. There we go.
Good morning.
Good morning, Connor.
So, how does Mum feel about the American Pope?
Well, we're all quite shocked, actually, frankly.
Well, he appears to be very similar to Pope Francis.
Yes.
In terms of his compassion for the poor and needy. And he was obviously a very close follower of Pope Francis, who made him a bishop, first of all. I mean, oddly enough, he appears to be a Peruvian national, but he's from a multicultural immigrant background in the United States.
Yes.
And he did missionary work in Peru, is what we read over here.
Yes. Well, he's from Chicago, which is a city in the Midwest. He's, he again born and raised in the United States. The shock, in a sense, comes from the fact that politically speaking, it's never been. It frankly is a first, and it's at least within the Vatican, it's very rare to see to see this sort of thing, because again, the idea is that, well, America is an influential country, regardless, and to have an American Pope is rather bizarre because of America's global influence. And so the idea that there could be an American Pope was quite stunning to frankly a lot of Catholics around the world, and even in Italy when it was announced, there was quite a shock in the crowd, and I think people noticed that. And at least here the betting odds, because as you know, of course, we have to bet on everything here in the States. The betting odds didn't even have Pope Leo at all.
Oh my goodness, did they not? Right.
And so it really comes as a surprise, because again, who could have thought an American Pope? I think, yes, he will probably continue the legacy of Francis. There's already a lot of discussion here about it. But again, it comes as quite a shock, because again, plenty of other Catholic countries have had, their guy in the seat, I suppose. But America's never really been considered a Catholic country, so it's a bit interesting, to say the least.
What I was suggesting, Connor, is that because he's a bit of a hybrid, with a Latin American citizenship and a mission over there, I suspect that helped him hugely.
He was talking about the new Pope.
Yes, I think the decision was probably very strategic. Having a pope that can communicate to the Spanish-speaking world, which is makes up a majority of Catholics, as well as the English-speaking world, is rather useful.
Yes.
One of the drawbacks of late Pope Francis was that he had somewhat of an inability to communicate effectively internationally, and a lot of the things he said were quite conflicting and confusing, especially to English-speaking Catholics, because again we're dealing with mostly secondhand translated source information or things that the Pope has said. But to have a Pope that can communicate not only with the English-speaking world, but frankly the world, as English is the predominant language of international diplomacy and politics, is going to be very useful. It's going to help maybe clear up some confusion within the church, and it's going to sort of perhaps allow the church to come into the 21st century in a way that we haven't quite seen. So I think it's going to be rather interesting.
Sure.
Is it going to be political, do you think?
Sorry?
Is he going to be political, do you think, particularly towards Trump?
I'm not really sure where this stands. It is sort of odd to have, because again, as you know, Trump is a rather contentious figure both at home and abroad, and now to have an American Pope is rather interesting. My hope of that is that Trump would keep it rather civil. Of course, that's maybe perhaps too much of a hope. It's already being politicized here in the United States because of the Pope's past criticism of Trump's immigration policy. Nonetheless, I'm not sure. It's perhaps too early to tell.
The commentators here are suggesting that he's going to be, where he is going to differ from Francis, is that he's a lot more conventional when it comes to gay rights, whatever you want to call them. They reckon he's going to be a bit more conservative about that. In contrast to Francis's sort of open-mindedness about it.
I mean, it's difficult to say. Francis never really. Again, perhaps that was somewhat of a miscommunication on Francis's part. Francis never really openly accepted, the gay community, of course. But he was perhaps more tolerant, in a sense, than previous popes have been. Nonetheless, a Catholic position is still a very conservative one, regardless. This pope does seem to have a history of saying things that are perhaps a little more to the right of Francis on that issue. I would say, from what we know, he's probably, again, very similar, as you pointed out, to Francis, but perhaps a touch more conservative. So I think that could factor out. Perhaps the improved communication on what the church's actual position is could help as well.
Yeah, I mean, the translation aside, my understanding of what Francis said was, who am I? Who are we to judge? That was the main line we were led to believe he took. But yes, I mean, I have very many Catholic friends and neighbours over here, because Arundel is a very Catholic community. It has a Roman Catholic cathedral at the top of the hill. I get the impression from all of them that the Roman Catholic Church's position on the issue remains steadfastly conservative.
Yes,
I think it will always be like that.
Yeah,
no matter
it will.
who's in power, because it's the sort of thing you get taught at school as well, and not necessarily that directly, but you're taught to just follow follow the path of the Catholic Church, which is, you don't have any diversions on the way. You've got to stick with the straight and narrow, so to speak. I kind of like the fact that he's younger as well. I think he's just below 70, 68, 69, whereas Francis was much older. And I wondered whether that influences the way you approach your work, in particular your role as a pope. I don't know. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. But I think
it gives the Roman Catholics a longer lifespan of their pope. Tragedy aside.
Yeah.
So they can look forward, tragedy aside, they can look forward to, another 15 years minimum, I would think.
Yeah.
Because he looks in good health.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And on the linguistic side of it, Connor, I mean, Francis was Argentinian through and through. And my friends who travel a lot, particularly South America, they have always said to me, Argentinian Spanish is impenetrable. It's a very, very odd form of Spanish. And of course, that was Francis's dialect. Whether he could speak Italian, I've no idea. Probably not. But there we are.
Yes,
you seem to be quite knowledgeable about this subject. Is the Catholic Church suffering the same drop-off in attendance that the Church of England is?
I don't think that. I think the Catholic Church in the United States is actually growing. You're seeing the Catholic Church is the largest growing group of Christians in the United States. So as well as in the UK, I believe.
I'd be interested to know. Maybe it's still early days as to whether the Americans, the Catholic Americans especially, are happy to have this person as the new pope. Do you think they like the idea of him being there?
Well, again, I think to a lot of Americans, who are Catholic, we've always sort of seen the Pope as being of a foreign origin, Italian or German or Argentinian. But I guess in a sense it is somewhat gratifying to have a Pope who can translate for the American people, translate to the American people, to the English speaking world. And so I think to us that's somewhat unusual. Perhaps it's a breath of fresh air. And that we can finally understand what the Pope is saying. I sort of wonder how many of his addresses will be in English as opposed to Italian.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They'll be in English. I hazard a guess. That's his primary language.
Although he spent a lot of time in Peru, and that's
Oh no, of course. But as I understand it, as Connor has said, he was born and raised in America.
Yeah.
Albeit with a very multi-ethnic immigrant background. So I've no idea what languages he grew up with, but one of them must have been American English.
Yes. It didn't take very long for American news agencies to actually interview his brothers, who are, of course, living in the United States. But yes, he did grow up in the United States. He grew up in, again, Chicago. And of course, there was a Chicago dialect, certainly. But it is. He grew up speaking English. so it's going to be rather interesting to see, what kind of addresses he makes, and if they will be in English. And I think, I think that's rather interesting. I do want to see the Pope speaking English. I don't think we've seen a Pope speak English. I don't think there's been an English-speaking Pope ever, at least a native English-speaking Pope, well enough to communicate without a translator. So I think I do want to see that, especially in interviews, perhaps.
Do you think there was some deliberate thinking in appointing him or choosing him as the next Pope? Because he has wider views as well. He's a little bit more up. He seems to be, from what I could work out and what he said in his speech, he seems to be more au fait with what's going on in the world. And maybe some of what he says and what he does could help influence some changes for the better, if I can put it that way.
Well, he's certainly younger than Francis, and he has some experience in Latin America. So I think having a Pope with this kind of experience, having a Pope who understands the English-speaking world as well as the Latin language speaking world is going to be beneficial.
Yes. Well, it's certainly going to have an influence, I think. A wider influence in under the realm of being still remaining as Pope, without becoming directly political.
It's a very fine line to tread, isn't it? Very fine balance.
Absolutely.
And I
Just
think
just a matter of interest, while we're talking about language, 17 martyrs, so-called, were burned in the centre of Lewis by Queen Mary I because they refused to return to Catholicism. But in fact, it was because they read the Bible in English. That's why they were burned to death.
Well, I think it was a bit more than that. They weren't prepared to give up the Protestant faith.
No, quite. But the reason given, as a lawyer, as you know, you would have a reason given, even though there are all sorts of other things in the background. The reason given was that they refused to stop reading the Bible in English.
Yeah. Wasn't it William Paxton who first published the English Bible?
I believe it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just watching on the BBC footage of the brother of the new Pope, Louis Prevost, literally doing a dance of joy, but commenting that even as a kid, his brother was focused on religion rather than playing with bows and arrows. But I think,
okay.
I think he's a lot more worldly than Francis, I suspect, because he's been hands-on. He's done missions in Peru and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
So, I think that's the word you were probably looking for, Rosie. He's more worldly.
Yes.
And so it will be harder for him to strike that balance of not treading into the cesspit of politics and just remain Pope. But there we are. We'll see.
That's what they meant. They're not meant to be political, are they? That's my understanding.
They're not meant to be, but they are.
But they're leaders. They are a leader of a huge community worldwide.
As Ray Fiennes said in the film Conclave to the new Pope, he said, "You have become probably the most famous person in the world."
Yeah.
And I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. Everybody listens and
Yes.
respects the Pope.
Yes.
Including non-Catholics.
Yes. Yes.
And even secular people.
And it doesn't stop the writers in the newspapers from making comments about perhaps what he has said or the plans that he may have. And that doesn't matter really, because you need that balance. You need that criticism, good or bad, don't you? So that you can have a good balance of an approach to the community.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is that the world needs the Pope.
Really? Oh, that's interesting. I find that interesting. Why do you think Trump is going to listen to him? Do you think Donald Trump is going to listen to him?
I don't think Trump listens to anybody apart from himself.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
There was nothing more fake, to use his word, than his pretending to be religious with a Bible in his hand during his rally.
Is it upside down?
I'm looking forward to it.
It was upside down.
That's right, it was upside down. It was upside down, yeah. Well, the man is as fake as you're going to get, and I don't think he'll listen to the Pope. He didn't listen to the Bishop of New York. I mean, forget her sexuality. That's not the point. I mean, she had the guts to challenge Trump and his attitude towards immigrants and the like.
Yes.
I wonder if I can change the topic slightly and ask Connor, based on the huge American presence that was here in 1945, did you celebrate at all or acknowledge VE Day in the United States yesterday?
Unfortunately, in the United States, VE Day isn't really seen as big of a holiday. The war didn't really affect us directly. We supported it, tremendously. One could say that the United States was the reason why, we were able to overcome the Nazis. But VE Day specifically isn't as celebrated, and I think the reason being is, again, it's seen as a European affair. Now, VJ Day, Victory over Japan, Americans might be a little bit more willing to celebrate because that was sort of an American venture.
Yes. That was how many months later?
It was in August.
Right. Yeah. The interesting thing is, Connor, that of course there are hundreds and hundreds of photographs on display of 1945, and 80% of them had Americans in them, beaming at the camera or kissing the girls.
Yes. Well, I mean, America obviously gets a lot of the credit these days for helping to liberate Western Europe. It's unfortunate that we're not as involved in those celebrations. The Russians are a little bit more celebratory of May 8th, because again, for them, in a sense, it's victory over a force that almost annihilated them. But again, from the American perspective, it's commemorating the second time we helped Europe out with Germany. So it's not really seen as, unfortunately, it's not really seen as that big of a thing here.
Well, it's a shame, because it should be.
It
should be for the sake of those incredible American troops and airmen who fought over here. I mean, Pershing in the First World War wasn't here long enough to have a great effect, but the sheer psychological weight of those Americans in the First World War was enough to drive Germany out of the war. Sheer numerical superiority, because Germany was just about holding on, and then the Yanks came over and had a bloody good go at them. But the influence in the Second World War was massive. Absolutely massive. And the Americans bore the brunt of D-Day. They attacked and took more beaches than the Brits and the Canadians did put together. I think it's a crying shame that the bravery of American troops and airmen are not celebrated in America. Great shame.
Yes. Can I tell you a landmark for me as a little boy? I had relatives in Litchfield, and we were visiting them one day, and a convoy, American convoy, went through, obviously on the way south for D-Day. But they were all black American drivers, and it was the first black American I'd ever seen.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we take all this for granted nowadays, but
had you not seen a black person at all until then?
Not that I recollect.
No. So it was the first black person you'd seen.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
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 But the strange thing was, it was also the first time I heard swear words, because the lead truck stopped, and the next one banged into it, and it went right down the convoy. Bang, 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 bang. And the drivers would get out and say, "Oh, F." I can remember saying to my grandmother, "What does that mean, Nana?" Putting him on the spot to explain.
Right.
I'd be interested to know if America celebrates the Vietnam War, the success they had in the Vietnam War. Do they do any celebrations at all that you know of, Connor?
So we don't really celebrate wars here in the United States.
Yeah, right.
That isn't really something we do. We commemorate them. We commemorate the fallen men, but it's we don't really celebrate a conflict
like we do VE Day. No. Okay.
Yeah, we don't really like thinking about that sort of thing.
Yeah. I must admit,
one of the things that impressed me was the last time I was in Washington, which is a few years ago now, but how well the Vietnamese had integrated into American society. They ran all sorts of little shops and things where you got snacks and things, and everybody seemed to be perfectly easy with them.
Yes, a lot of the South Vietnamese who escaped communism have found their way to the United States, even to the Midwest, which is a far cry from Vietnam. And so you have a lot of people who farm rice, a lot of Vietnamese rice farmers in the Midwest. A lot of rice comes from there, and you essentially have this sort of dotted, South Vietnamese diaspora all over, the United States. I have a friend of mine who she's half Vietnamese. Her father fought in the war, and her mother is Vietnamese from South Vietnam. So she it really is rather interesting in a sense. We did try to continue to support the South, I guess, in that way. But I guess most Americans sort of look at it as a failed war, sort of as a tragedy, as opposed to a victory.
They're right. Sadly, it wasn't a victory by any means.
Also, the fought on television. The Vietnam War was fought on television.
Yes.
Oh, yes, it was
Yeah.
in many ways. But is it Washington where there's that wall of commemoration?
Yes. There's
And
a wall.
virtually all of the names of the known dead, the lives lost in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, they're all on that wall, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. I was amazed when I saw footage of that. It looks like it goes on forever.
Yeah. Sad, actually.
Have you seen it, Connor?
Yes, I have.
Right, good for you. But yeah, terrible.
Yeah. And if I can just go back to VE Day just for a little minute, I couldn't help but thinking of Ukraine and Russia, and here we were celebrating, and I thought, should we or shouldn't we? I don't know. What do you guys think? I mean, I know they had a small contingent marching in the parade, the Ukrainians.
They did.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have stopped it going ahead because
no, not that. I mean, the kind of celebration.
In cynical contrast, there is today going on, as Connor has alluded to, the Russians celebrating in Moscow the winning of the war against the Nazis.
Yeah.
At which is the Chinese president and the Vietnamese president, amongst others.
Yeah.
And Putin's speech, which has just been reported, he's using it all to justify his invasion of Ukraine. Because he's still peddling the lie that Ukraine is full of Nazis and anti-Semites.
Yeah.
So, in stark contrast to our VE Day, how can I put it, natural, genuine celebrations and commemoration, you've got Putin, or Rasputin as I call him, milking it all to justify what he's doing over there, and claiming that the whole of Russia is still very much behind the operation, which is simply not true, of course. Yeah, so there are two faces to this.
Yeah.
And I think we turned the right face yesterday.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about the Nazis in Ukraine is I worked within about 12 miles of the Russian border in a place called Lugansk. And I was working with relatively young people, when I say that, 25, 26 years old. And on the way to the venue, they stopped and said, we thought you might like to see this. And we walked into a forest, just a few hundred yards, and there was a little hump. And this was where the partisans hid during the war and would come out and would attack German troops. And then they would disappear back into these foxholes. And they've maintained them. The lie of full of Nazis and so on and so forth is well served, even within just a few miles of the Russian border, where I may say a lot of the population are very sympathetic to Russian rule.
Yeah.
Well, that's the point. They are.
Yeah.
So if I may interject, the Russians don't really see the term Nazi in Russia is rather different from the term we use to describe it in the West. So in the West, when we say Nazi, typically speaking, we mean an ideology, a political ideology. We're talking about racism, anti-Semitism. We're talking about the idea of conquest coming from Hitler and the Nazis, and sort of the racial domination, that aspect. So you when you say Nazi, you think of like a neo-Nazi, a skinhead, that sort of thing. In Russia, that isn't really necessarily the perception always. It can be, but a lot of the perception of Nazi in the Russian context, in the Russian mind, and this is from having been over there, and having people that I know both in Ukraine and Russia, is that Nazis are anyone who is an existential threat to Russia itself. Nazi Germany, every man born in 1923 in Russia died during the war. So when Russians say Nazi, they mean an existential threat to Russia from the West. They don't necessarily mean that the racism or the anti-Semitism. They think about it in terms of a Western existential threat. So when Putin says that the Ukrainians are Nazis, that the West are Nazis, that NATO are Nazis, they perceive an existential threat coming from the West through Ukraine. And so that's sort of what the image is conjured up in the Russian mind when he says that. And so for propaganda purposes, that's what he means. It's not necessarily anti-racism or anti-Semitism necessarily.
That's really interesting. I never knew that. That's very, very informative, young man. Very informative.
Did you get the same impression that I did that when you were there? Because Rosie and I both worked in Russia. Is that the Russians do tend to be a bit narrow-minded when it comes to beliefs and
yeah.
So I knew quite a bit of Russians, some of whom are more liberal, some of whom are more conservative. The liberals who spent time in the States were somewhat concerned at how far Russia is moving politically in the sense of being an authoritarian country, being anti-Western, and so they saw the change as rather alarming. I can only imagine what's going on now. But Russia sort of seems to think of itself, especially for the more pro-Russia crowd, they seem to think of themselves as bringing, world peace against a sort of a Western hegemony. There's this. When I was in Moscow, there was this mural on a building, and it was a Russian bear handing out bulletproof jackets to doves of peace. And so there's this idea that Russia, instead of say America, is the true savior of peace in the world, and there's this idea that Russia is this guardian of civilization. So it's a rather bizarre view they have of themselves.
Yes,
very interesting.
Yeah, the first time I went over the wall into East Germany, I was taken to a park. There are two things which I noticed about that. One was that it had a very English tea shop with one rock cake, but the other a huge monument to Russian soldiers liberating Germany.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's
Yeah.
Guys, I'm afraid I must go. Connor, that was a very interesting few minutes, young man.
Thank you.
I had no idea. I really, that's really interested me.
We're coming up to 11:30 anyway, so perhaps it's time to call it quits. But yes, a very, very interesting morning. So
thank you.
Cheers. Bye, Rosie.
Bye, Keith. Bye, Connor. Lovely to meet you this morning.
All right. Nice to meet you.
Nice to see you, Connor. Tell me, when do you return to flying?
Probably in the fall, I would assume.
Are you looking forward to that?
Very much so, yes.
Oh, good. I follow through your mother. I follow your progress very, very carefully, and I'm just delighted that your dream is coming true.
Well, thank you, Keith.
Terrific. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. See you soon, Connor.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
And there we are. There's another good morning of chat. I'm sorry that I cocked things up a little while and interrupted our good discussion, but that's me, I'm afraid. And I really do appeal for somebody who can help me with the technology. Toodle pip. and we'll see you on Monday. Well, we'll probably see you in bits and pieces throughout the week. We'll see you next Thursday for a full day's programming. So that's it for this week. And thank you for being with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. There we go. There we go.
Thank you.